So once your part has dried, you can take the clips off and remove it, and you should have a part that's nicely shaped, ready to sit back on here. And you can see the shape's not far off. We put that in there, and now we don't have to put any effort in to make it bend, and we know that we're not going to have any splitting of the wood, particularly in this area here is your weak point, where you've got a narrower area and you're trying to create a curve. Now I've already fitted the one on the other side because I wanted to just go through that process and remind myself of anything we needed to talk about. And on that side, and I've noticed it's the same on this side, there is a tendency for this corner here to flare outwards. So if you can see how that's sort of flared out, and that's because when we've clipped it, we've clipped that against the bulkhead there, so the bulkhead will be in line with these fastener positions. So we've clipped it in terms of that, but this bit perhaps wasn't clipped tightly down, and so it's dried sitting slightly away. So if I show you, you can see how that wants to just kick out a little bit, which isn't correct and not how we want it. So what we're going to do, I've corrected it by soaking this and then reclamping it down with some glue behind it. But what we're going to do is we're going to soak it before we put it on. So we're just going to make it wet. Which means we can manipulate it whilst we're gluing it in place. So we can leave that to just soak in. You can see I've just put one dollop of water, one drop on each side, and we'll just let that soak in. So we'll have a little bit of flex in that, and then we can make sure that we've clamped that down nice and tight when we put that on. So while that's soaking in, let's just talk about adhesive. So the adhesive that you want to be using for this particular job is a gel, a CA gel. And that's because we don't want to be nailing this in. We don't want any holes in it. As you progress, you might find that you want to drill holes and put tree nails and that sort of stuff in. But we have no need in this instance, because the lower hole's getting painted, so you wouldn't see them anyway, and the upper hole already has them laser engraved on. Yeah. The reason for a gel glue is slightly longer curing times. You can see 10 seconds as opposed to sort of 5, which is standard with my CAs, or less. Also, you can decant some and it stays usable for much longer than traditional CAs. So we're going to put some on a cap and we're going to spread it about using a cocktail stick. So it also doesn't sink into the wood quite as quickly, so you've got a little bit more playing around time. So the brand isn't especially important. I'm using this one from Deluxe Materials. I've also used Zap in the past and found that very good, but I couldn't really speak for any others, but both of those are certainly suitable for the job. So our water should have soaked in, so yeah, and the way to check it is, can we move that? Yeah, we can. We've got movement in that now, so that's good. Now don't worry about this interfering with your CA. Actually, wet wood bonds better with CA, so shouldn't be a problem. So previously, when we were bending this into shape, we didn't worry too much about the fit. This time I want you to go in, make sure you're happy that the part lines up nicely with the holes here, and that you're happy you know how you're going to put this in, and that you can put it down and it fits nicely. One thing you can do, because we're going to glue this in stages, one thing you can do once you've popped it in is just take a pencil and run your pencil underneath, making sure that you've got the fit where you want it to be, and that will then give you a visual aid. You can see the pencil line there, so that when you're clamping it and you're focused on the clamps, if it slips up a little bit, you'll be able to see the pencil mark and you go, all right, that's not right, and then you can correct it. Now, don't worry too much if you're not fully perfectly aligned in some places. We can sort all of that out, but do your absolute best to get it aligned as best as possible, so that you've got less cleaning up work to do. So I can see that by fitting it this way, I'm quite a bit off with the squares there. So I really want it to line up with those squares as best I can. So we'll just shove it out a little bit. So it's important to understand this, because when you come to glue this down, you need to have a way of working. So we're just going to tuck it in right on the edge of that. Yeah, and then that makes us lined up with that as best we can. So yeah, that's good. So what we're going to do is, in the first instance, we're going to glue up to this second gun port opening. Then we'll be able to get in and then glue the rest of this down in one fell swoop. So if you're confident that you can do the whole thing in one, do the whole thing in one, but as soon as you press and make contact, your glue's going to grab really, really quickly with the wood. So it's less risky to just go up to that point. I'm just going to wet this again, because whilst I've been talking it's dried out. Just let that soak in for a minute. So whilst we're soaking that again, we'll get our glue out and make sure you've got your clamps to hand, different types, whatever you think you're going to need. It might even be worth refitting it with clamps so you know how exactly you're going to clamp it. Okay, so using our cocktail stick, toothpick, whatever you want to call it, we're going to run our glue like so, and we can use this to spread it out, and it's easy to see where you've put the adhesive. Make sure you don't get any on the front. I just did a little bit. Take it off immediately if you do, because we don't want to be sanding that front face really. We don't want to lose any of that lovely detail that Vanguard Models has kindly put on for us. Right, so it changes colour when you put the adhesive on, so you know that you're where you've covered. And just gonna tuck it in, line it up with our holes. You've got a moment just to start bonding it, making sure it's not rising above your top line. and making sure it's not dropping below the line as well. There we go, that's spot on. Just want to make sure that is nicely, tightly clamped. Clamp it there at the top. Okay, now that should be glued on now, but we'll give it a moment just to make sure everything's nice and tight. Visually check that it's all sandwiched together nicely as it should be. I mean, it is, but what harm can a clamp do? And we'll just leave that a moment and then we can glue the rest of it. So with that now glued down, we can now just gently take that back and put the rest of our glue underneath. And if you look at it from this side, you'll be able to see where you've put the glue. So we're just spreading it out before. It's a little bit more tricky when you're doing it like this, but it's quite doable. And the further out you get, the easier it becomes. I'm going to run out of glue in a second, I have to decant some more. So what I will do is clamp this down and let that dry, and then I'll do another little bit in a moment at this end. So once again, making sure that it's sitting firmly, squarely at the top. Clamp, clamp, clamp. You can never have too many clamps when you're doing things like this. Just make sure everything's nicely sandwiched together. Visually check again. So by the time I've decanted more glue, we should be in a good position to finish the job. Remind myself where we got back to. Now if you do get some glue oozing out underneath, we need to take that away because it's going to interfere with the fitting of the plank that goes directly underneath. Just going to take that clamp off. Yeah, I've over clamped, thought I had. I've clamped where I've not glued. It's really important that you get glue right down to the edges and that everything the whole surface area has adhesive on. Okay, that is everything covered. So again, very carefully placing it in. I mean, the reality is that's probably already glued. There we go, that's on. Now the instructions tell you to clamp it in place and glue it on later. The reason why I'm not doing that is because when you come to put that first plank on, you need to blend it in with this anyway, because they have you painting the hull and then adding that on. I think that for an absolute beginner could cause a problem. So what I want to be able to do is sand the plank with this in situ. So we can tape this up and protect it and leave this last plank at the bottom here that doesn't have any of the nails in, which I think will get covered by the whale anyway later on. Has a plank that goes on top of it. So what I want to do is have it in situ so I can sand flush, and we can mask off when we're painting. And if you're brush painting rather than airbrushing, as they do in the instructions, it's less of a problem anyway. So yeah, there we go. So I think we are now probably dry. Just run your finger along there, make sure there's nothing causing a problem. If you think there's glue, then what you can do is go along with a square file and just file it away. I think I'm okay. Okay, and that's it. That is these parts on. So we've done that both sides. If you don't get it perfect, don't worry about it. It's your first build. It's wood, so we can sand things and correct them as we go. And because we're putting the second planking down, if there's a bit of a difference in depth, it really doesn't matter, because we will sort it out, and everything here is going to get painted. So any imperfections we will sort out anyway. So we are now ready for the second planking stage. So let's have a look at that. Right then, I did say when we came to the second planking that we would do something a little bit more scientific. And what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce you to something called, that's not going to stay up, is it? Something called a planking fan. So let me explain what that is, and then I'll walk you through the process of creating a planking fan. So a planking fan is a method of applying a little bit of mathematics to help you work out the depth of your taper at any given point along a plank. So it's a plan that you do before you start planking, and although it's not foolproof, it gives you a good indication of what you should be doing on every plank, how many planks you need, and what's going on at each point. So you can draw it on a piece of paper. I use a spreadsheet because I can then use that template for any model. I just take out the old data and put the new data in. So it's quite a simple process. What we're going to do is we're going to measure the distance between the end point here at the top of the keel and the end point here at the top of the template here that's in place at various different places in the hull, and that's going to give us an indication of how many planks we can fit in there, and how thick, how wide those planks should be, how deep those planks should be, I should say. So for example, if we can fit 12 planks down this center point, which will be our widest part, and we can get 12 planks in this depth here, we know we've got no tapering to do. But if we can only get 8 planks in here, we've got to do some tapering. So I'll show you how all that works. Generally, along this sort of section here in the middle, we will have full length planks and we won't have to taper, but it's good to just sense check that. And then at this end we'll definitely have to taper every single plank. The instructions tell us that. So what we're going to do is we're going to work out what that looks like in advance so that we know what we're doing and we can take measurements on our planks. So it's a slightly different method, it's a bit more scientific. When I say it's not foolproof, you can measure on a plank that you're taking 2 millimeters away, and you could take 2.2 millimeters away. So you do have to do a little bit of checking as well, and a little bit of correcting as you go. There's different ways of approaching second planking, but I like to try and practice doing my best planking on this second planking, because you never know when you want to actually go, actually, I don't want to paint the hull, I want to varnish it and I want to see my woodwork. And I'm always striving to get as good as I can at it so that eventually I can do a perfect job every time. You're not going to do that on the first one, but it's an aim, it's a good place to go. So some people like to put a plank sort of halfway down like that and have it, well, this plank's splitting a little bit, I'll do it that way, have it sort of curve up and what have you. And you know what, we're painting all of this, so what the planking pattern looks like doesn't really matter. But for me, I prefer to have all the planks nicely tapered with an even tapering so that we can get the job done and looking smart, and the same on both sides. So we will plank, doesn't really matter whether you plank from the bottom up or the top down. We're going to plank from the top down, which is how they do it in the instructions. So yeah, this plank's splitting a little bit. The method we're going to use for putting these planks on, because obviously we don't want holes in, is to use the gel CA glue. And as you can see, if you naturally put it on, it wants to pull away. So we are going to have to do a little bit of shaping to get planks where we want them to be, and what have you. So yeah, right then. What we're going to do is draw some lines with our pencil. So we can use the tree nails, that's these little round circles that have been etched onto here. So they represent the wooden pegs that have been driven in to hold the planks in place. And when you look at these things on the real ship, if you go around HMS Victory and you go to the oak deck that is still original, you can see that the tree nails have a little cross in the top where the tool has hammered them in tight to hold everything in place. So yeah, this is going to be our guide. Now, a good tool for this is a flexi curve, which is basically a straight edge that you can make not straight by bending it into any shape you like, and it'll hold that shape. So that's really handy for going around the curve. If you've not got a flexi curve, and I'm sure many of you won't have, then a strip of cardboard that you can just run down here. Anything that allows you to draw a straight edge. So using my flexi curve, we're going to line up in the middle of the 2 rows of tree nails there, and just push that into place and draw a line. Now, that's not very straight, is it? Let's do that again. That's better. Right, so we're going to draw a line for each one of these, which basically is for every place where we've got a bulkhead. So draw your lines on. I'm going to do the rest of it off camera and then I'll come back to you. Okay, I'm going to do my best to explain this to you. So this is my planking fan spreadsheet, and you can see we have a starboard plan and a port plan. So I've just put my pencil lines on the starboard side, so we'll do the starboard side first. And what we have is 17 pencil lines marking our bulkheads. So across the top here, where it says bulkhead number, we have up to 17 which are live. These little red triangles means those ones aren't alive, ignore those. So this is the area that we're going to populate with data. At the top here we have our plank thickness, so that's 4 millimeters. That's the width from the top to the bottom of our plank. So the next thing we need to understand is the gap at each one of the full length of the gap at each one of these bulkheads. Now, which bulkhead you're going to call number 1 is up to you. You could start left to right, or I generally always start at the bow, even if I'm on the starboard side. But I think for ease, what we'll do, so you can visualize it, is we'll call that bulkhead number 1 and that bulkhead number 17. So we need to measure the gap amongst each one of these lines and put it in that top row. Then that means we'll be able to calculate how wide the planks need to be to fill the gap at each one of these bulkheads. So each column will represent the bulkhead, and each one of these plank numbers down the side here will represent the plank. So if we're going to start at the top and we put this plank on first, that'll be plank number 1. So okay, so with our measurements put in along there, we can see that our widest point is right at the stern, which is what we would expect. Our centre point is bulkhead number 10, which is our next widest point at 63 millimeters. And then you can see the taper from bulkhead 12 onwards. We start to taper before we fall off a cliff down to 32 millimeters at bulkhead 17. So what we need to do then is go back to, I've highlighted number 10 there, bulkhead 10 as sort of our centre point. It's not really. The centre point of the actual length of the hull is between 8 and 9. But and then we've divided 63 by 4, which gives us 15.75. That's how many planks we need to complete that. So 16 full planks in depth of that gap. So I've actually extended this a little bit by 2 because I was down to 14 planks only on here. So I've added a couple of columns on. If you're doing this on paper, now you've got your gap and that calculation there, you can now draw 17 columns and use, if you use line paper, then you're doing 16 down. So what we've got to do now is populate each one of these plank widths. So what I've done is I've auto summed each column. So here I have an auto sum. It's too short because it was originally done just to 14, so I need to amend that. But the idea is if we put 4 in there, it will automatically say 4 there, and that tells me that I've covered 4 millimeters of our gap. So if I did 4 all the way down, you'll see it's done 56. And if I was to do another 4, and let's just correct the auto sum. So we put equals in here and then highlight all of that, hit the tick. So if I put full length in there now, you'll see it goes to 64, and that means we've gone 1 millimeter over. So we're going to need to have at least a couple of planks a little bit shorter. So if we change that one to 3 millimeters and that one to 3 millimeters, we're at 62. So if we did that to 3.5 and that to 3.5, we'd be at 63. So do you see? What we're doing is, as we populate it, we're checking that our calculation is correct against our gap, and that's what that total figure does. So it's a very simple way of working. It means that you can mess around and decide which planks you want to taper and at what point. I'm going to want to leave that one a full one and probably that one a full one. So in the end, we'll do that at 3.5. that at 4, and that's balanced. So I know that I'm thinning that plank to that there. Now that will change on each one of these rows. So you'll find that we might stay at 3.5 for most of this, and that'll work. But we might find, because the gap's getting narrower, that we actually go down to 3. And you might find going this way, we might get smaller. So you now understand what we're doing. We're putting in the planks and the maximum of 4mm, the depth of the plank, and working out how to fill that gap. So I'm going to do that for all of those and show you what that looks like and how we balance it so that we've got an even looking plank the full width of our hull. So what you've got to do now is work out the depth of each one of these planks. So for these two that are 63, that's absolutely easy. We just copy what we've done there. So you can see there our gap is 61.5 and it's 63. So we've got to taper the planks a little bit at this point. So if we change that to 3.5 and take 0.5 millimetre off, we're at 62.5. So if I take that one down to 3.5, we're at 62. So if I take that one down to 3.5, we're at 61.5. So we've got the same distance on the next one. So we just copy that. And we can do the same for actually the next two. There we go. And then here we drop down to 61. So if we put the same information in, and we need to take out 0.5 millimetre. So if we make that one 3.5, that gets us where we need to be. And then we're up to 62. So at this point, we're starting to get a wedge, and we're going to want to put the wedge in at number 15. Why? Because I don't want to put it right at the bottom, and I'm putting a full length width plank in there as much as I can. Actually, that's not the best colour, is it? There we go. So we'll put our wedge in there, which means that's where our extra plank will go, between 15 and 16. So at this point, what we're going to do, even though that's starting to increase from 61 to 62 to 64 to 66, we're going to leave all of that the same. Which means that we'll naturally get a wedge between 15 and 16, which we will then fill to fit the size of it. So in theory, the wedge should be 3 millimetres wide at its widest point. We can see that we've only covered 61 of a 66 gap, so sorry, 5 millimetres at its widest point. So that'll be more than the width of one plank, so we've probably got 2 little wedges to put in. We'll have a look at that when we're doing it, but we can leave the planks all of that length. So when we're working forward, we've got to do exactly the same thing. So we're at 61.5 planks there. Sorry, gap, I should say. So if we copy that across to plank 12, so we're oversized, so we need to taper another couple of planks. So if we do that one at 3.5 and that one at 3.5 and that one at 3.5. So it means we're starting to taper pretty much from the centre. There's only a couple of planks that are full width all the way before we're tapering, and there's 2 planks here that never get to full width to be able to fill the gap. What it means is we'll fill the gap, and there won't be any gaps between the planks because we've pre-calculated it. So 13, we're going to lose another millimetre. So at this point, rather than making these have more 3.5s, you could, if you wanted to, start making those tapers bigger and leaving those wider. But what we're going to do is gradually taper all of them so it looks as uniform as possible. So to keep it even, we'll just take 0.5 millimetre off each plank. There you go. And that gets us to our 60. Now we're falling off a cliff a bit. We're going from 60.5 millimetres to 57. $59, $58, $57. So there's only the top plank so far that we've put in with no tapering up, and the bottom plank. So at plank 15, we're almost going to be terminating. So actually what I'm going to do, because what I've done is I've numbered the lines here. You can see on this bottom plank we're starting to put shaping here for plank, this bottom plank, as we pass bulkhead 14. So here we actually want to do probably 3.5, although we'll actually be shaping it. That's put 35, not 3.5. There we go, and that means that can be a 4. Yeah, okay, so that balances. Right, I'm going to carry on doing this, and then I'll show you what that looks like when it's done. Okay, so I've completed my planking fan for the starboard side, and what you see is there's a couple of planks that disappear, because as we get to this curve in the prow here, some of these planks will terminate before they get to these last bulkheads, and then we're heavily tapering on the sort of the lower half of the hull, and then we're tapering to about half the just a little bit more than a little bit less than half the width of the plank as we get down. So by doing it this way, we're making sure none of the tapers go beyond half the width of the plank, which is helpful, and we're making sure it's as uniform as possible. So when the eye sees it, the plank will gradually taper, and you won't have some that are tapering drastically to compensate for the fact that you didn't taper others as you went down the process. So what we're going to do is make sure when we do each plank, we're going to check and see if that's okay, and probably when we've done about 4 planks, we'll remeasure the gap and recalculate the remaining ones. So generally I'll recalculate on a short hull like this about twice. On a bigger ship you might do it 5 or 6 times, because as you sand it, you take more off than you intended and what have you, and you know the measurements are rounded, so where it says 61.5, it might have been 61.56, so you might have to do some alterations as you go. So it's just a guide. It's just a guide to give you an idea of what the plan is to make this work. So yeah, and then we'll have this wedging like we did there in that same place, which will be just slightly higher than 2. So these planks obviously slightly narrower than the first planking, and that's why we've got more of them going on. So yeah, I mean, this first plank we're going to take about 0.5 millimetre off, which is handy because that looks like it's losing 0.5 millimetre, and lay it down. So let's have a look at taking the planking fan and applying that to the planks. So if we soak one of our planks, we can make it very malleable. It's like a little sponge. We can twist it, we can shape it, we can push it in different directions. So while we're gluing this down to the hull, it would be better if we soak this so we can make sure it conforms to the shape that we want. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to soak our planks, which is not what it tells you to do in the instructions. The instructions have you do it in the same way as we did the first planking, and then talk about not worrying about the clinker because we can sand it out. And whilst that's all well and good and not untrue, the better that we can get the plank to fit the shape that we want, the easier the sanding task will be. So we need a long water bath for our planks. So what we'll do is we'll mark them up, we'll sand them to shape, then we'll soak them prior to gluing them on. So we don't need a massive bath of water. I've got a small rectangular bit of Tupperware with water that's fairly deep. I'm not going to turn it on the side to show you because it'll go everywhere. But we need to be able to soak the section that we're bending. So I've already put the taper in using the guide from the planking fan. So this is our first top plank, and we need to bend it into shape. So we're just going to immerse that into the water and leave that for 2 or 3 minutes just to soak. Then we can take it out and see how we're doing in the way of bendability. It shouldn't take long. It's not a particularly thick plank. And whilst that's soaking, I can get my glue ready. So we're going to use our gel glue like we did before, and we're going to put a little bit of glue on, spread it on, and we'll probably do the bow bit first and hold it into place and make sure that glues into place nicely, and then do the rest of the length of it. But we're going to test fit this plank on our hull before we do anything. So once we've given it a bit of a soak, just get the excess water off. There we go. So we can put our plank into the little gap that we've got. We can glue it in to start with here on the bow, sort of like that, and then when we're happy that's glued in, we can come along and glue it along the rest of the length. So it's slightly different than we did on the first planking where we sort of started in the middle, because we're shaping at the front of the bow, and that's going to keep it nice and tidy, and then we can push that up there like that. So what I'm looking at is, do we need a chamfer on this, because we are going to have a whale plank go over the top of this, but I think a chamfer might be helpful. Yeah, so I think from about that point on we need to put a chamfer on. So I'm going to do that and then I'll come back to you. You've seen me do a chamfer before. It's exactly the same process. So you can see how putting that chamfer in is giving us a much tighter fit. It's not perfect, particularly at this point here where we've got a very steep fall away, but it's not an issue because we can do some filling afterwards if needs be. But yeah, we should be able to glue all of that down and get that to sit nicely. I have no concerns now. So and you can see that that's already, we've put it in 2 or 3 times now and it's already starting to take the shape. So we are good to go with gluing this in. So let's do that. Yeah, that's looking good. Now don't worry if this isn't as tight as you're planking. We will be able to sort that out when we put the whale on. We'll be able to adjust that a little bit. This last plank here that's marked on, that bit's sandable. This is a good time, if you're worried about getting glue onto this, to just put some masking tape over it before you start gluing on the first planks, just to protect it. Okay, time to put our first plank on. So we're going to glue it to around about this point here, because it goes fairly flat after that, and we've still got enough space to be able to get underneath with our glue. So just gonna turn it upside down, pinching it where I want the glue to stop, and then we can just spread the adhesive along the full length and full width of the plank there. Now it needs to be thin enough that it's not going to ooze out, thick enough that it doesn't immediately just sink in, but this plank being damp at the front is already saturated, if you like. There we go. Now this should dry really quickly, so you've got to be careful. We're going to place it in at the front into the gap. Push it into place, hold it down for a sec. You can see that's already not flicking back. Like I say, it speeds up the grab time when the plank is wet. There we go. So that's on. That's how quick and easy it is. So all we've got to do now is glue along the rest of the length. I'm just turning on its side so I can see what I'm doing better. Okay, I think I'm going to, just because of the time it's taken me to put it on, I think I'm going to just glue that up into place and do it in 3 rather than 2. There we go. Making sure I've got no glue oozing out. I'm just using my fingernail to wipe it clean. There we go. And you can see I've got a couple of little gaps there. Those little gaps that are also going to change what the planking fan looks like. So that's why we need to keep rechecking it. Okay, so we've just got the back end now to glue. Okay, there we go. That is our first plank on. Now, unlike before where we were doing equal sides, if you want to work all the way down one side, you can now do that, because you're not going to twist the hull now. That was only when we were doing the first planking. So you can carry on doing this and then flip over and do the other side. So I'm going to do what I did last time and plank all of one side, showing you the planks, but I'll speed them up. I'm not going to show you tapering because I've shown you that. I'm not going to show you soaking and bending because I've now shown you that. What I will do is I will stop and talk to you if there's anything particular that I think needs to be pointed out. Otherwise, we're going to continue to lay the planks using the planking fan as a guide, and if there's anything that changes in that, I will talk to you about it. But we have got our first plank on. So now that that's on, just go to the back and make sure it's hugging that transom piece nicely. And if not, put a little bit more glue in and hold it down. But there you go. That's our first plank down. The rest of it should follow suit. We will have a little bit of trickiness when we get to this corner here. That's going to be our most difficult bit. And we might get a little bit of clinker as we go, but as long as the gap is not wider than the thickness of your plank, you'll be able to sand it back. Okay, so we can now carry on with putting our second planking on, and if you take your time and do a nice job of it, you will have the option to varnish and show off your work. But if this is your very first model, don't expect it to be a great job. I expect that when we've done this, we're going to do some gap filling, sanding, getting it perfect before we paint the hull, and that'll be the next thing that we really look at in earnest. But in the meantime, I'm going to put these planks on and we'll speed it up so you can see it, and then, like I say, if there's anything in particular to talk about, I'll raise it. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so. It's free, and if you'd like to support the channel, you can hit my PayPal link in the text below. Every pound goes straight into the channel to keep the cameras rolling and to do more fun stuff for you to watch.